Welcome to Wild Cowboy Tales. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? In a wild land where justice is often forged in steel, and the flames of injustice burn dreams to ash, one woman was stripped of everything. But when outlaws thought they had crushed her spirit, they made a deadly mistake. Because from the ashes of a burned-down ranch, a storm was rising, cold, unshakable fury, forged in lead, and ready to take justice back into her own hands. Chapter 1. The Smoke on the Horizon. The smell of sagebrush after a summer rain was supposed to be Laura Finch's comfort. It clung to her clothes, permeated the rough-hewn timbers of her small ranch house, and promised renewal to the dry Arizona soil. Her ranch, the last stand, was a testament to her late husband's dream and her own stubborn will. For 5 years since Jeremiah's passing, Laura, with her sun-kissed hair and eyes the color of a stormy sky, had clawed a life out of this unforgiving land. Her calloused hands as capable with a rifle as they were with a plow. It was a quiet morning, the kind that promised a sweltering day. Laura was out by the corrals, mending a broken fence post, her trusty Winchester leaning against the rail, within easy reach. Her only companion, a grizzled old ranch hand named Silas, was out checking on the far pasture. The solitude was both a blessing and a burden, a reminder of the life she had built alone, and the constant vigilance it demanded. Then she saw it. A faint, dark smudge against the impossibly blue eastern horizon. At first, she dismissed it as a distant dust devil, a common sight in these parts. But it grew, spreading, deepening in color. It wasn't dust. It was smoke. A cold dread seeped into her bones, tightening around her heart like an iron band. That smoke was too close, too dark to be a simple brush fire. She dropped her tools, grabbed her Winchester, and scrambled onto her mare, Dusty. Without a moment's hesitation, she galloped towards the rising plume, her mind racing through the possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Rustlers, raiding Indians, or worse, the gang that had been terrorizing isolated homesteads to the north, pushing ranchers off their land. As she drew closer, the acrid scent of burning timber filled the air. Her stomach lurched, a sickening certainty blooming in her chest. It was too clear, too defined. The smoke wasn't from wildland. It was from a man-made structure. Her eyes, narrowed against the stinging wind, finally made out the horrific scene. Not a distant ranch. Not a neighbor's place. It was her own. The last stand. Flames devoured her home, leaping from the main house to the barn, casting an angry, orange glow against the morning sky. The familiar silhouette of her life, her sanctuary, was being consumed by a ravenous inferno. The sound of crackling wood and collapsing timber was like a scream in the quiet vastness of the desert. Laura pulled Dusty to a skidding halt at the edge of the property, her breath catching in her throat, a choked gasp of horror and disbelief. Her world, built painstakingly brick by painstaking brick, was turning to ash before her eyes. The corrals were empty, her small herd of cattle gone. The chickens lay dead, scattered around the scorched earth. And then she saw them. Dark figures, 5 of them, moving through the smoke-filled haze, their laughter echoing, a discordant symphony of destruction. They were crude, brutal men, their faces partially obscured by bandanas, their movements swaggering with cruel satisfaction. They were celebrating their handiwork. One of them, a hulking brute with a scarred face, turned and spotted her. His cruel grin widened. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The little lady herself. He raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to mock, to assert his dominance. Come on down, pretty. We got something special for you. A cold and holy rage, sharper and hotter than the flames consuming her home, ignited within Laura. It wasn't a scream that escaped her lips, but a low, guttural growl, born of primal fury and absolute despair. Her hands, usually steady, trembled as she raised her Winchester. Her vision blurred, but the image of their grinning faces, framed by the inferno of her ranch, burned itself into her mind. These men had taken everything. Her home, her livelihood, her peace. But they hadn't taken her spirit. Not yet. She fired. Not at them, not yet, but at the ground a few feet from the scarred brute, sending dust and rock shards flying. It was a roar, a challenge, a declaration of war. The shot echoed through the canyon, momentarily silencing their cruel laughter. You'll pay, Laura screamed, her voice raw, hoarse with emotion. Every single one of you. You'll pay for this. The outlaws, startled by her ferocity, momentarily hesitated. They had expected tears, pleading, easy submission. They had found fury, forged in lead. As they scrambled for their own rifles, Alara turned dusty, spurred her hard, and rode away from the inferno, the smoke and ash clinging to her, a constant reminder of her loss. She didn't ride in retreat. She rode to hunt. And these men, these monsters, would soon learn the true meaning of a woman scorned, a fury unleashed from the ashes of her world. This was no longer just about survival. It was about vengeance. And the West was about to meet a force it had never seen before. Chapter 2. The Tracker's Oath. Alara rode like a woman possessed, the roar of the fire and the outlaw's cruel laughter echoing in her ears. Dusty, sensing her rider's desperate urgency, stretched her legs, galloping across the rugged terrain. The smoke from the last stand continued to blacken the sky behind them, a permanent scar on the horizon. Alara's eyes, usually a soft gray, were now chips of granite, hard and unforgiving. The initial shock had given way to a burning, visceral hatred. She rode for hours, putting miles between herself and the burning ranch, until Dusty's flanks were lathered with sweat and her own body ached with exhaustion. She finally reined in by a hidden spring, small oasis known only to a few, a secret she and Jeremiah had cherished. She dismounted, her legs stiff, and let Dusty drink deeply. The cool water was a temporary balm to her parched throat, but it did little to quench the inferno raging within her. Silas, her old ranch hand, would be back by now. He would see the smoke, the devastation. He would know. Alara felt a pang of guilt for leaving him to the grim discovery, but her immediate instinct had been to survive, to escape the outlaw's clutches, and to plan her retribution. She rummaged through her saddlebag, pulling out a half-eaten piece of jerky and a few cartridges for her Winchester. Her mind, usually so clear and rational, was a chaotic storm of grief and rage. Who were they? Why her ranch? She had no enemies, save for the unforgiving land itself. Jeremiah had been a fair man, a good neighbor. They had no wealth to speak of, just honest toil. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, Alara heard the distant thud of hooves. Her hand instinctively went to her rifle. Friend or foe? In this desolate land, it was always a question of life or death. A lone rider emerged from the shadows of a nearby mesa. Silas. His usually stoic face was a mask of grief and fury, his eyes red-rimmed from the smoke and tears. He pulled his weary buckskin mare to a halt, dismounting slowly. Alara, he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. God help us, girl. It's all gone. Every last stick of it. Alara met his gaze, her own eyes dry hard. I saw it, Silas. I saw them. 5 of them. They laughed. The last word was a poison on her tongue. Silas, a man who had seen his share of hardship in the West, looked at her, truly saw her. He saw not a broken woman, but a spirit forged in the flames, ready to strike back. You gonna let them get away with it, Alara? He asked, his voice low, challenging. Never, Alara replied, her voice a cold and wavering whisper. I will hunt them down. Every last one. They will pay. Silas nodded, a grim satisfaction settling on his weathered face. Good. Because I'm coming with you. He had been with Alara and Jeremiah since they first broke ground on the last stand. His loyalty was as solid as the Arizona rock. I seen their tracks. 5 horses. Heading north, towards the Devil's Backbone. They took your cattle too. The Devil's Backbone, Alara muttered, recognizing the notoriously treacherous mountain range. A perfect hideout for outlaws. They won't be easy to find in there. No, Silas agreed. But I'm a tracker, Alara, best in these parts. And I know these mountains like the back of my hand. We'll find them. We'll make 'em pay. He looked at the smoke still staining the western sky, then back at Alara, a woman stripped of everything but her fierce resolve. The fire had taken her home, but it had ignited a new, dangerous purpose within her. She was no longer just a rancher, she was a hunter. And her prey, the men who had dared to burn her world, would soon learn the true meaning of a tracker's oath and a woman's fury. The long, bloody trail of vengeance had just begun. Chapter 3: Echoes in the Canyon. The trail to the Devil's Backbone was arduous, a relentless journey through a land scarred by wind and time. Alara and Silas rode in grim silence, their shared grief and burning resolve a palpable presence between them. Silas, with his weathered eyes and uncanny instinct, was indeed a master tracker. He found faint impressions in the hard-packed earth, a broken twig, a disturbed stone, whispers of the Outlaws' passage that would have been invisible to a less trained eye. "They're not trying to hide their trail much," Silas observed one morning, pointing to a relatively clear set of hoof prints in a sandy wash. "Overconfident. Think they're too far out, too deep in the backbone, for anyone to follow." "Let them think that," Alara muttered, her hand resting on her Winchester. "Their overconfidence will be their undoing." Her initial rage, sharp and searing, had now settled into a cold and wavering determination. She ate little, slept less, her mind consumed by images of her burning ranch and the faces of the men who had destroyed it. She cleaned and recleaned her rifle, the familiar weight of the steel a comfort in her hands. She was preparing for a war, and she would be ready. The Devil's Backbone lived up to its name. A labyrinth of sheer cliffs, twisting canyons, and treacherous mountain passes, it was a natural fortress, a haven for those seeking to disappear. Silas led them through winding trails, occasionally dismounting to examine a faint sign, his concentration absolute. "They took your cattle," Silas pointed out one afternoon, indicating faint tracks leading off the main trail. "Leading them up a side canyon. Gonna sell 'em at the nearest settlement, probably to some unsuspecting fool." "No," Alara said, her voice hard. "They won't get to sell them. We'll get them back." They continued their pursuit, the sun beating down, then the nights turning bitterly cold. They rationed their supplies, relying on Silas's hunting skills for fresh meat. The landscape was brutal, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to their quest for vengeance. One evening, as they made a small, hidden camp beneath a towering mesa, Silas paused, his head cocked, listening. "Smoke," he whispered, faint. "North. And horses. Many horses." Alara's heart pounded. "Their camp." Silas nodded grimly. "Looks like it. Probably a hideout. They're comfortable. Got a fire going. They think they're safe. Then they're about to be proven very wrong," Alara said, her voice chillingly calm. She checked her rifle, pushing the lever action. They broke camp before dawn, moving with the stealth of desert predators. Silas led them towards the source of the smoke, approaching with extreme caution, using every shadow, every rock, for cover. The air grew colder as they ascended, and the scent of wood smoke, mingled with the faint aroma of stale coffee and unwashed men, grew stronger. As the first hints of light began to paint the eastern sky, they reached a vantage point overlooking a secluded canyon. Below them, nestled amidst a cluster of gnarled junipers, was a crude camp. 5 men, just as Alara had seen, huddled around a dying fire. Their horses were tethered nearby, including several of Alara's own cattle, branded with the last stand mark, now grazing idly, oblivious to their fate. The outlaws were rough-looking men, their faces hardened by a life of crime, their movements swaggering with an arrogant confidence. Alara recognized the scarred brute who had mocked her at the ranch. She also noticed their leader, a lean, weary man with sharp, calculating eyes and a distinctive silver-plated pistol on his hip. He looked like a coiled viper. "That's Slick Calhoun," Silas whispered, pointing to the leader. "Heard tales of him. Ruthless. Smart. Don't take chances. He's the one who burned your place, Alara. He's the one who ordered it." Alara's gaze hardened, focusing on Slick Calhoun, the face of her enemy, the man responsible for her nightmare. A cold, vengeful fire burned in her gut. She would make him pay. "What's the plan, Alara?" Silas asked, his voice low. "We hit him now, while they're asleep. Or wait." Alara studied the camp, her mind clear, precise, calculating. 5 men, heavily armed. They had the element of surprise, but they were only 2. A direct assault, even with surprise, was a gamble. "No," Alara said, her voice a low, steady whisper. "Not yet. We don't just kill them, Silas. We make them suffer. We make them regret the day they ever touched the last stand. We make them truly pay." She looked at Silas, her eyes reflecting the dawn, cold and determined. "This isn't just about bullets, Silas. This is about making them understand fury, forged in lead." Silas looked at her, a glimmer of awe in his grizzled eyes. He saw the transformation complete. The rancher's wife was gone. In her place stood a force of nature, a woman of unyielding will, ready to unleash a vengeance as fierce and unforgiving as the desert itself. The echoes in the canyon were not just the wind, they were the coming storm. Chapter 4: The Shadow of Justice. Elara's plan was born of a cold, methodical fury, a strategic chess game played out against the backdrop of the unforgiving wilderness. It wasn't enough to simply kill the outlaws, they had to be dismantled, made to understand the depth of their transgression. Silas, a man of simple, direct justice, watched Elara's transformation with a mix of respect and trepidation. She was a different woman now, her mind sharp, her resolve absolute. "They think they're safe here," Elara murmured, observing the outlaw camp through her binoculars from their hidden vantage point. "They've grown careless, complacent, and that's where we strike," Silas agreed, cleaning his old sharps rifle. Divide and conquer. Elara's plan was to systematically erode the outlaws' sense of security, to sow fear and suspicion among them, turning their own overconfidence into a weapon against them. They wouldn't rush in with guns blazing. They would become ghosts in the devil's backbone, striking from the shadows, making the outlaws believe the mountains themselves were turning against them. They spent the day observing the camp, noting the outlaws' habits, their sentry rotations, their weaknesses. Slick Calhoun, the leader, was indeed cunning, but he also had a short temper and a streak of paranoia. The scarred brute, who Elara knew as Grit, was impulsive and easily provoked. As evening descended, casting long, eerie shadows across the canyon, Elara and Silas made their first move. Under the cover of darkness, they crept down towards the outlaw camp. Silas, a master of stealth, moved like a whisper, Elara a silent shadow behind him. Their target, the outlaws' horses. They managed to slip into the makeshift corral without a sound. Elara, with a deftness born of years of ranching, skillfully untied the hobbles of the outlaws' mounts, then slapped each horse on its flank, sending them stampeding into the darkness. A cacophony of snorts and thunderous hoofbeats. They left Elara's own cattle untouched, a subtle message to the outlaws. The sudden commotion threw the outlaw camp into immediate chaos. Shouts and curses echoed through the canyon as the outlaws scrambled, grabbing their rifles, convinced they were under attack. Rustlers, Grit roared, firing wildly into the darkness. "They're after our horses." Slick Calhoun, however, was more cautious. He peered into the shadows, his eyes narrowed, a cold suspicion growing in his gaze. "No," he muttered. "Too quiet, too clean. This ain't rustlers. This is a warning." He looked at the untouched cattle. "And they left the branded cows. Someone knows." Elara and Silas, hidden high above, watched the scene unfold, a grim satisfaction in their eyes. The first seed of doubt had been planted. The outlaws were now on edge, their sleep broken, their security shattered. Over the next few days, the psychological warfare continued. At night, Elara and Silas would strike again, small, calculated acts of sabotage. They'd steal their food, contaminate their water supply, cut their ropes, leaving just enough evidence to suggest a human hand, but never revealing their presence. They even managed to subtly alter the outlaws' tracks, making it seem as if a lone, vengeful spirit was toying with them. The outlaws grew increasingly jumpy, their nerves frayed. Arguments broke out around the campfire, accusations flying. Slick Calhoun, his paranoia growing, began to suspect his own men, believing one of them was trying to undermine him. One afternoon, Elara, positioned on a high ridge, watched as Calhoun confronted Grit, his voice laced with venom. "You're getting clumsy, Grit. You're leaving tracks a blind man could follow. You trying to get us caught." Grit, always quick to anger, retorted defensively. "I ain't done nothing, Slick. It's this damn place. It's haunted. This whole mountain's against us." Calhoun backhanded him across the face, sending him sprawling. "There ain't no ghosts out here, you fool. Only greedy men. Or vengeful ones." He looked around, his eyes narrowed, anew, and settling thought dawning on him. Unless it's her, that rancher woman. She saw us." Elara felt a thrill of grim satisfaction. He was beginning to understand. The shadow of justice was falling upon them, not in the form of a sheriff's badge, but in the unwavering fury of a woman scorned. The outlaws, once complacent, were now unraveling, their unity fraying under the relentless, unseen pressure. The time for subtle strikes was almost over. Soon, it would be time for lead. Chapter 5: The Whisper and the Trap. The outlaws' camp had become a crucible of paranoia and fear. Slick Calhoun's distrust, fueled by Alara and Silas's relentless psychological warfare, had turned inward. Accusations flew, punches were thrown, and the once cohesive gang was now a fractured, volatile unit, teetering on the brink of implosion. Alara and Silas, observing from their hidden perch, watched the unraveling with grim satisfaction. Silas, accustomed to the brutal realities of the West, recognized the signs of a gang turning on itself. "They're ripe," he murmured. "Calhoun's lost control. He's looking for someone to blame, and his men are looking for a way out." "Good," Alara replied, her voice cold. "We'll give them both." Her next move was designed to amplify their internal strife and force Calhoun's hand. They would use a whisper, a carefully crafted lie, to turn the outlaws against each other, ensuring that their vengeance was not just swift, but poetic. Under the cover of a moonless night, Alara, moving with the silence of a desert cat, crept down towards the outlaw camp. She carried a small, empty pouch, one of her own, recognized by the ranch's distinctive stitching. Her target was Grit, the scarred brute who had mocked her. She waited until Grit was alone, taking his turn at guard duty, his nerves frayed, his eyes constantly darting into the shadows. As he dozed off for a moment, head slung against a rock, Alara slipped into his camp. She carefully placed her empty pouch near his bedroll, making it look as though it had fallen from his pocket. She then subtly disturbed some of his personal belongings, making it appear as if he was packing to leave in a hurry. She retreated as silently as she came, leaving behind the seeds of betrayal. The next morning, as the outlaws gathered around their meager fire, Slick Calhoun immediately noticed the scattered belongings near Grit's bedroll. His eyes, already narrowed with suspicion, fell upon the small, distinctive pouch. "What's this, Grit?" Calhoun asked, his voice low, dangerous. He picked up the pouch, holding it up for everyone to see. "This ain't your style. This looks like something from the last stand ranch. The one you burned." Grit's face paled. "I don't know nothing about that, Slick. It ain't mine." "Ain't yours?" Calhoun sneered, his paranoia boiling over. "Then how'd it get in your bedroll? You been plotting against me, ain't you? Stealing from me, maybe. Trying to run off with the goods." The other outlaws, already distrustful, looked at Grit with suspicion. They remembered his wild shots, his complaints about the haunted mountain. Calhoun had always favored Grit, but now, even his loyalty was turning to poison. "No, I swear, Slick. I swear on my mother's grave," Grit pleaded, desperation in his eyes. Calhoun drew his silver-plated pistol, its glint cold and deadly in the morning sun. "You swear too much, Grit. You been talking to someone, ain't you? Spilling our secrets. Thinking you could get a better deal on your own." Grit, seeing the unreasoning fury in Calhoun's eyes, saw his life slipping away. He scrambled for his own pistol, a desperate, futile gesture. Crack! Calhoun fired. The shot echoed through the canyon, and Grit crumpled to the ground, a growing red stain spreading across his chest. He lay there, twitching, then still. The other outlaws stared, stunned into silence. Calhoun, his face a mask of cold fury, holstered his pistol, his gaze sweeping over them. "Anyone else got any bright ideas about betraying me?" he growled. "Anyone else want to try their luck with this haunted mountain?" Fear, raw and absolute, settled over the remaining outlaws. Calhoun had asserted his dominance, but at a heavy cost. He had eliminated a potential traitor, but he had also deepened the chasm of distrust within his own ranks. Alara and Silas, watching the brutal scene unfold from above, exchanged a grim glance. "One down," Silas muttered, "and they're eating each other alive." "Now they know we're here," Alara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And they know it's personal. He killed Grit for a lie. He'll be looking for us now, truly." Calhoun, having cemented his leadership through violence, now turned his attention outward. He knew the ghost was real. He knew the woman from the ranch was out there. And he knew she wanted vengeance. He would hunt her down, silence her, and then disappear from the devil's backbone forever. He began to give orders, sending his remaining 3 men to scout the surrounding canyons, to search every crevice, every ridge. He was turning the hunt around, becoming the hunter once more. Alara felt a surge of exhilaration. This was what she had planned. Calhoun was now exposed, forced to commit his dwindling resources. He was no longer safe in his hideout. He was coming for her. "The trap is set," Alara said, her eyes fixed on the distant figures of the outlaws fanning out. Now, we spring it. Silas nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He knew Alara was ready. The whisper of deception had done its work. Now, it was time for the roar of lead, and the full and bridled fury of a woman scorned, as the game of hunter and hunted reached its inevitable, bloody climax in the heart of the Devil's Backbone. Chapter 6. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The death of Grit, executed by his own leader, sent a chilling message through the outlaw camp. Slick Calhoun had reaffirmed his authority with a brutal hand, but at the cost of further eroding the loyalty and trust of his remaining men. They now feared him, but they also resented him, a volatile mixture that Alara and Silas planned to exploit. Calhoun, his paranoia heightened, believed that killing Alara was his only path to security. He divided his 3 remaining men, sending them to scour the labyrinthine canyons of the Devil's Backbone, while he himself took a more direct, aggressive approach. Convinced he could track Alara better than anyone, Alara and Silas, always one step ahead, used their superior knowledge of the terrain and their mastery of stealth to evade Calhoun's patrols, turning the outlaws' hunt into a frustrating, exhausting chase. They became whispers in the wind, shadows in the canyons, appearing and disappearing at will, chipping away at the outlaws' already frayed nerves. One afternoon, Alara spotted 2 of Calhoun's men, Razor and Dusty, moving cautiously through a narrow, winding arroyo. They were jumpy, constantly glancing over their shoulders, their fear a palpable presence. Their spread thin, Alara whispered to Silas. To buy themselves an opportunity. Her plan was simple, brutal, and effective. They would create a phantom, a ghostly presence that would prey on the outlaws' fear. Under Alara's direction, they set a subtle trap. They loosened a boulder on a high ledge overlooking the arroyo, making it precarious. Then, they laid a false trail, leading directly beneath it, one that would catch Razor and Dusty's attention. They watched from a hidden crevice as Razor and Dusty approached, their movements slow and cautious. Razor, a lanky man with a cruel smile, spotted the disturbed earth, the subtle impression of moccasins. "Hey, Dusty, looks like we got a lead," he called out, his voice a little too loud, betraying his nervousness. "Looks like our little rancher's wife is trying to hide her tracks." As they followed the false trail directly beneath the teetering boulder, Alara gave Silas the signal. Silas, with a long, sturdy branch, carefully dislodged the boulder. It fell with a sickening crunch, crashing down into the arroyo, narrowly missing Razor, but crushing Dusty beneath its immense weight. A choked scream, then silence. Razor, stunned and terrified, scrambled backward, his eyes wide with horror. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the ridgeline, but saw nothing. Only the impassive rock faces, the endless sky. He was alone. "It's true," Razor shrieked, his voice cracking with unreasoning fear. "This mountain's cursed. She's a witch. A ghost." He dropped his rifle and ran, scrambling back the way he came, his fear lending him a natural speed, convinced that the vengeful spirit of the last stand was haunting him. Alara watched him flee, a cold satisfaction in her eyes. "Two down," she muttered. 3 to go. And now they know true fear. Silas, a veteran of countless brutal encounters, looked at Alara with a profound sense of awe. She was ruthless, efficient, and utterly devoid of mercy. She was forging her fury in lead, not just with bullets, but with the raw, psychological terror of the wilderness itself. Meanwhile, Calhoun, increasingly frustrated by the lack of progress and the dwindling numbers of his men, felt a cold dread begin to creep into his heart. He found Razor, babbling incoherently about ghosts and witches, his eyes wide with madness. Calhoun, a man who scoffed at superstition, felt a prickle of unease. 3 men gone. His best tracker, Grit, dead by his own hand. Now Dusty, crushed by a rockfall. And Razor, driven mad by fear. This wasn't just a rancher's wife. This was something else. Something far more dangerous. He looked at the distant smoke from the Last Stand ranch, still faintly visible on the horizon. A monument to his cruelty. But now, it felt like a beacon, drawing him towards an unknown, terrifying retribution. Calhoun gathered his last 2 remaining men, a pair of nervous, shifty-eyed thugs. He saw the fear in their eyes, the doubt. He knew he was losing them. "We ain't running," Calhoun snarled, trying to instill some bravado. "We find this bitch. We put a bullet in her, and then we get out of these cursed mountains. Understand?" His men nodded, but their movements were slow, their eyes constantly darting into the shadows. The hunter had become the hunted, and Alara, a woman whose home had been turned to ash, was now the predator, moving silently, relentlessly, through the canyons, her fury a cold and wavering flame, ready to consume those who had dared to ignite it. The final act of vengeance was approaching, and the devil's backbone would bear witness to its brutal and forgiving conclusion. Chapter 7: The Reckoning at Whispering Falls. The psychological torment inflicted by Alara and Silas had taken its toll. Calhoun's remaining two men, Snake Eye and Tiny, were little more than jumpy, fearful shadows, their loyalty replaced by a desperate desire to escape the haunted devil's backbone. Calhoun himself, though outwardly defiant, felt the insidious tendrils of doubt and paranoia tightening around his once unyielding will. The rancher's wife was no ordinary woman. She was a vengeful spirit, a force that bent the wilderness to her will. Alara, sensing their vulnerability, decided it was time to isolate Calhoun, to separate him from his last vestiges of support. She aimed to lure him to a place where he would be utterly alone, where the true reckoning could take place. Her target, Whispering Falls, a remote, secluded waterfall deep within a narrow canyon, a place known for its echoing acoustics and deceptive shadows. Under the cover of night, Alara and Silas executed their most audacious maneuver yet. They created a trail, deliberately obvious, leading directly towards Whispering Falls. But along this trail, they left subtle, chilling clues: a small, scorched piece of timber from Alara's ranch, a few scattered cattle bones, and even a roughly carved wooden figure of a burning house. Each clue was designed to mock Calhoun, to remind him of his initial act of cruelty, and to lure him deeper into their trap. As dawn broke, Calhoun and his two nervous men discovered the trail and the morbid clues. Snake Eye and Tiny immediately balked. "This ain't right, Slick," Snake Eye stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "This is a trap. She's playing with us." Calhoun, though a cold dread was creeping into his heart, refused to show weakness. "It's a challenge," he snarled, trying to maintain his authority. "She wants to face me. Fine. We'll give her a fight she won't forget." But the fear in his men's eyes was undeniable. Calhoun knew he couldn't trust them. They would bolt at the first sign of trouble. He made a snap decision, one born of desperation and ego. He would go alone. He would face the rancher's wife, silence her, and reclaim his reputation. "You two," Calhoun barked, pointing a furious finger at Snake Eye and Tiny. "You stay here. Hold this position. If I ain't back by sundown, you ride out. Don't look back." His men, relieved beyond measure, eagerly agreed. Calhoun, his silver-plated pistol gleaming, followed the macabre trail towards Whispering Falls, his face a mask of grim determination. He was walking into a trap, but his pride wouldn't let him turn back. Alara and Silas watched him go, a silent understanding passing between them. The predator was now isolated, vulnerable. They positioned themselves in the rocks overlooking Whispering Falls, a natural amphitheater of rock and water. The waterfall, a shimmering curtain of silver, fell into a cool, clear pool, its constant murmur a hypnotic, eerie sound. The acoustics of the canyon were perfect, amplifying every sound, distorting every shadow. Calhoun arrived at Whispering Falls, his eyes sweeping the scene. The canyon was empty, save for the incessant murmur of the falling water. He stood alone, his hand on his pistol, his nerves stretched taut. "Come out, you witch," Calhoun roared, his voice echoing eerily. "I know you're here. Show yourself." Silence. Only the whisper of the falls. Then, a voice, cold and clear, spoke from the shadows, amplified by the canyon's acoustics. It was Alara's voice, devoid of emotion, filled with a chilling authority. "You came, Calhoun." Her voice resonated from all directions, seeming to come from the very rocks themselves. "You came to my burning home. You laughed. You took my peace. You will pay for that." Calhoun spun around, pistol raised, firing wildly at the echoes. "Show yourself. Coward." "I am no coward," Alara's voice replied, closer now, but still unseen. "I am justice, Calhoun, forged in the fires you lit. And you are about to meet your reckoning." Suddenly, Silas, positioned high above, fired his Sharps rifle. The bullet whizzed past Calhoun's ear, kicking up dust from the rock. Calhoun instinctively ducked, firing back, his eyes darting frantically, able to pinpoint their location. Alara then made her move. She emerged from a shadowy crevice, her Winchester held steady, aimed directly at Calhoun. He spun around, his eyes wide with shock. Alara Finch, he gasped, seeing her clearly for the first time since the ranch. She was no longer a terrified rancher's wife. She was a vision of vengeance, her eyes burning with an unholy fire. Calhoun raised his pistol, a desperate, final attempt. But Alara was faster. Crack! Her Winchester roared, the shot echoing through the canyon, mingling with the murmur of the falls. Calhoun staggered, a bullet ripping through his shoulder, forcing him to drop his pistol. He fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding arm, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning terror. You shot me, he whimpered, fear finally replacing his arrogance. You burned my home, Alara replied, her voice cold and steady. As she advanced, her rifle still aimed at him. You laughed. You killed my cattle. You brought this upon yourself, Calhoun. You will pay for it. She stood over him, the murmuring falls a backdrop to her unwavering fury. This was the reckoning. This was the moment of truth. Calhoun, the ruthless outlaw, was at the mercy of the woman whose world he had sought to destroy. The price of his cruelty was about to be paid, forged in lead, at the cold and forgiving heart of Whispering Falls. Chapter 8. The Weight of Justice. Slick Calhoun lay whimpering at Alara's feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his arrogant facade shattered. The canyon's echoes amplified his cries, a discordant counterpoint to the relentless murmur of Whispering Falls. Alara stood over him, her Winchester aimed, her face a mask of cold and wavering justice. Silas, having descended from his perch, stood a short distance away, his Sharps rifle ready, a silent sentinel. Please, Calhoun begged, his voice hoarse with pain and fear. Don't kill me. I can give you information. Gold. Anything. Just let me go. Alara's eyes, devoid of mercy, fixed on him. Gold means nothing to me, Calhoun. And your information, it will not bring back my home. It will not erase the fire. You will pay for what you did. It wasn't just me, Calhoun cried, desperate to shift the blame. It was Thorne. Silas Thorne. He ordered it. He wanted to buy your land, and your husband wouldn't sell. He told us to make an example, to make sure no one else stood in his way. Alara froze, her rifle lowering slightly. Silas Thorne. The name was a familiar whisper of power and ruthlessness in the territory, a cattle baron known for his ruthless expansion and iron-fisted control. Jeremiah had spoken of him, of his attempts to acquire land, but Alara had dismissed it as idle speculation. Now, the full, sickening truth hit her. Their ranch wasn't just a random target. It was a deliberate act of intimidation, a message from a powerful man. Thorne, Alara repeated, her voice a low, dangerous growl. Silas Thorne ordered this? Calhoun, seeing a flicker of something other than pure vengeance in her eyes, latched onto it. Yes. He paid us well. He told us to burn the ranch to the ground, to send a message. He wanted you gone, wanted your land for his railroad expansion. The revelation was a hammer blow, shattering the simple narrative of outlaws and vengeance. This was bigger, far bigger. Her personal tragedy was a small piece in a much larger, darker game of power and greed. Silas stepped forward, his face grim. Thorne's reach is long. Alara. He's got his fingers in every pie in this territory. Railroads, mines, politics. He's a dangerous man. Alara looked at Calhoun, her rage now mingling with a cold, clear resolve. Killing him here now would bring an end to her immediate quest for vengeance, but it would not bring justice for Jeremiah, or for the last stand. It would not stop Thorne. You will ride with us, Calhoun, Alara stated, her voice chillingly calm. You will tell us everything you know about Silas Thorne. Every detail, every contact, every dark secret. You will be our key to bringing him down. Calhoun stared at her, then at Silas. He saw no mercy, only a grim and yielding determination. He was caught between a rock and a hard place, the vengeful rancher's wife, or the wrath of Silas Thorne. But the woman before him, forged in lead, seemed the more immediate and terrifying threat. All right, Calhoun rasped, his eyes darting frantically. All right, I'll tell you everything. Just don't let Thorne get his hands on me. He's worse than any devil in these mountains. Alara nodded, her rifle still aimed at him. Then you will cooperate, every step of the way. You lie to me, Calhoun. You try to escape. And I will put a bullet in you myself. Understand? Calhoun swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. Understand. They bound Calhoun's good arm, improvising a bandage for his shoulder. He was a prisoner now, a sniveling tool in their larger quest. Alara looked at the desolate beauty of Whispering Falls, a place of stark contrast. It had witnessed her most brutal act of vengeance, but it had also revealed a deeper, more insidious evil. The simple quest for retribution had transformed into a complex pursuit of justice. The outlaws had burned her ranch, thinking they had extinguished her spirit. Instead, they had ignited a fire that would spread far beyond the last stand, reaching into the dark heart of power and corruption that fueled the expansion of the American West. Alara, the rancher's wife, now carried the weight of a larger justice, a burden she accepted with unwavering resolve. The hunt for Thorn had begun, and the West was about to learn that fury, once forged in lead, could bring down even the most powerful of men. Chapter 9. The Web of the Viper. With Slick Calhoun as their unwilling informant, Alara and Silas embarked on a new, more perilous journey. The simple quest for vengeance had evolved into a complex game of cat and mouse against a much larger, more powerful adversary, Silas Thorn. Calhoun, terrified of both Alara's wrath and Thorn's retribution, spilled his guts, detailing Thorn's intricate web of corruption. He spoke of Thorn's hidden silver mines, operated with slave labor. They were smuggled across federal lands. He described Thorn's network of corrupt sheriffs, judges, and railroad officials who turned a blind eye to his illegal dealings. He even revealed Thorn's more sinister ventures, blackmail, extortion, and the strategic assassination of rivals who stood in his way, all designed to consolidate his power and ensure the railroad line passed directly through his burgeoning empire. "He's got eyes and ears everywhere," Calhoun whimpered one evening, huddled by a meager campfire, his shoulder still painful. "No one crosses Thorn and lives to tell about it. He'll find out I talked. He'll send his best men worse than me." Alara listened, her face grim. Thorn was indeed a viper, his coils wrapped around the very arteries of the territory. But for every thread of Thorn's influence, Alara saw a weakness, a point of attack. "He won't find out from you, Calhoun," Alara said, her voice cold. "Not if you keep telling us everything. Every single detail. Your life depends on it." They traveled stealthily, avoiding main trails, keeping to the remote passes and hidden canyons that only Silas knew. Alara, with her newfound focus, absorbed every lesson from Silas, learning to read the land like a book, to move like a ghost, to anticipate danger before it arrived. She practiced with her Winchester daily, her aim growing unnervingly accurate. She was no longer just the rancher's wife. She was a hardened survivor, a force to be reckoned with. Their destination, the nearest federal marshal's office, a week's ride away, a place where they hoped to find a lawman incorruptible enough to take on Thorn. But even that was a gamble. Thorn's reach was long. One afternoon, as they crossed a wide, open plain, Silas suddenly pulled his horse to a halt. His eyes, narrowed against the sun and the distant horizon. "Riders," Silas said, his voice low. "Looks like a dozen of 'em. Coming fast. And they ain't friendly." Alara's heart pounded. Thorn. He had found them. Calhoun whimpered, his face ashen. "It's Thorn." He knew. He always knows. "Silence," Alara snapped, her eyes fixed on the approaching cloud of dust. "Silas, is there cover?" "Not much," Silas replied, his hand going to his sharps. "Open ground. They'll have us pinned." Alara quickly assessed their options. To run was futile. Thorn's men were too many, too fast. To fight in the open was suicide. There was only one chance: deception. "Calhoun," Alara said, her voice firm and wavering. "You told me Thorn wanted me alive. To make an example." Calhoun, trembling, nodded. "Yes. He wanted to break you. Publicly." "Good," Alara said, a grim determination setting on her face. "Then we give him what he wants." For a moment, she turned to Silas. "Silas, you take Calhoun, hide in that dry creek bed. Keep him quiet. I'll draw them off. Make them think I'm alone. Then you ride hard for the marshal's office. Tell them everything. And tell them Alara Finch sends her regards." Silas stared at her, a look of profound worry in his eyes. "Alara, that's suicide. They'll overwhelm you." "No," Alara countered, a fierce light in her eyes. I will not be overwhelmed. I will be a ghost. And I will lead them on a dance they'll never forget. This is my fight, Silas. My way. This is for Jeremiah. And for the last stand, you deliver the message. That is your part of the justice. Before Silas could protest further, Alara nudged Dusty forward, putting on a show of desperate flight. She wanted Thorne's men to see her, alone, fleeing in terror. She would lead them away, by Silas and Calhoun the time they needed to escape. Silas, with a heavy heart, grabbed Calhoun, pulling him off his horse and forcing him into the dry creek bed. You messed this up, Calhoun, Silas growled, and I'll be back to finish what Alara started. Understand? Calhoun, terrified, nodded, huddled in the dust. Alara galloped across the plain, her form a clear target against the setting sun. She heard the shouts of Thorne's men, saw them spurring their horses, a dozen riders closing in. Her heart hammered, but her resolve was cold and clear. She would not be broken. She would not be taken. She would become a phantom, a living embodiment of the fury they had unleashed. As the outlaws gained on her, Alara veered sharply, leading them towards a maze of treacherous, rocky canyons, a place where a lone rider could disappear, and a dozen men could be ambushed. She had learned well from Silas, and she knew these lands intimately. The Viper's web was vast, but Alara Finch, forged in lead, was about to tear it apart, one thread at a time, and a final, desperate gamble for justice. The true hunt was about to begin. Chapter 10, Fury Unleashed. Alara's desperate ride into the labyrinthine canyons was a ballet of survival. She pushed Dusty to her limits, weaving through narrow passes, leaping over jagged rocks, and disappearing into shadowed crevices. Thorne's men, a formidable force, pursued her with grim determination, convinced they had their prey cornered. But Alara was no longer prey, she was a predator in disguise, leading them into a trap forged in her own fury. She used every trick Silas had taught her, every instinct honed by years on the ranch. She created false trails, dislodged rocks to block their path, and used the echoing acoustics of the canyons to make her presence seem larger than life. Her Winchester, a familiar extension of her arm, was ready, but she held her fire, waiting for the opportune moment, for the perfect ambush. Meanwhile, Silas, with Calhoun in tow, rode hard towards the federal marshal's office. Calhoun, terrified of Thorne's inevitable wrath, cooperated completely, babbling every detail of Thorne's empire to Silas. The old ranch hand, his heart heavy with concern for Alara, spurred his horse, knowing that her sacrifice depended on him delivering their message. Back in the canyons, Alara led Thorne's men deeper and deeper into the treacherous terrain. She could hear their frustrated shouts, their curses echoing through the narrow gorges. They were losing patience, their discipline fraying. This was her chance. She found a perfect ambush point, a high, narrow ledge overlooking a constricted passage, a place where Thorne's men would be forced into a single file. She dismounted, her heart thumping, her hands steady. This was it, the final stand. As Thorne's men entered the passage, their horses moving slowly, Alara took aim. She picked off the lead rider, a clean shot to the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Chaos erupted. The horses reared, throwing their riders, blocking the narrow passage. Alara fired again, deliberately shooting at the horse's legs, creating further mayhem, effectively trapping Thorne's men in the confined space. Their cries of panic and pain mingled with the whinnies of the wounded animals. She was not aiming to kill, not yet, but to disable, to disarm, to instill fear. From her vantage point, Alara began to systematically disarm them, shooting rifles from their hands, grazing arms and legs, making sure they knew they were outmatched, outmaneuvered, and at her mercy. Her movements were fluid, precise, a testament to her transformation. Then, from the rear of Thorne's men, a figure emerged, pushing through the chaos. It was Thorne himself, his face contorted with rage, his own pistol drawn. He had ridden with his men, confident in his numbers, only to find himself in Alara's deadly trap. "You bitch," Thorne roared, aiming his pistol at Alara. "You'll pay for this. I'll make you suffer." Alara met his gaze, her eyes burning with a cold, unwavering fury. This was the man who had ordered the destruction of her life. This was the monster who had taken Jeremiah. She raised her Winchester, not to injure, but to end. Crack! The shot echoed, sharp and final, through the canyon. Thorne's eyes widened in disbelief, then rolled back in his head as he crumpled to the ground, a bullet precisely between his eyes. He lay there still, his reign of terror ended not by a marshal's badge, but by the furious justice of a rancher's wife. Silence descended, a heavy, profound silence, broken only by the groans of Thorne's wounded men and the whimpering of the horses. Elora stood on the ledge, her rifle still smoking, her body trembling, but her spirit endowed. The inferno of her ranch had been avenged. The fury, forged in lead, had been unleashed. A few days later, Silas returned with a detachment of federal marshals. Calhoun, his testimony damning, was taken into custody, along with Thorne's surviving men. The marshals, armed with Calhoun's revelations and the physical evidence of Thorne's death, quickly dismantled what remained of his corrupt empire. Justice, though bloody, had been served. Elora stood by the charred remains of the last stand, the lingering smell of smoke still in the air. The ranch was gone, her past a memory. But she was not broken. She was free. Silas approached her, his old eyes kind. "What now, Elora?" Elora looked out at the vast, open horizon, at the endless possibilities of the West. She thought of Jeremiah, of the dream they had shared. And then she thought of the new strength she had found within herself, the fury that had transformed her. "Now," Elora said, her voice clear and strong, "we rebuilt. Not just a ranch, Silas, but a new life. A life forged in courage, in justice. And we make sure no one else suffers what we did. We fight for this land, for what's right." She looked at Silas, a faint, determined smile touching her lips. "This West, it needs more than just marshals. It needs people who aren't afraid to stand for what they believe in. And I ain't afraid anymore, Silas." Silas nodded, a proud smile on his face. He knew she was right. Elora Finch, the rancher's wife whose home had been burned by outlaws, had met their fury with her own, forged in lead. And in doing so, she had become something more than a survivor. She had become a legend, a force for justice in the untamed heart of the Wild West. Her story, a testament to courage, resilience, and unwavering fury, had only just begun.